So we are gathered here, as you know, this is for the T.G. Narayanan Memorial Lecture, and it's being delivered by, you already know this person, excellent person from Monga Bay, India, who's the director of Monga Bay, India, Gopikrishna Warrier. He will be delivering the T.G. Narayanan Memorial Lecture on social deprivation. Before we start, a few words about T.G. Narayanan, for you to know who T.G. Narayanan is. Let me invite his son, Dr. Ranga Narayanan, to come here and just introduce his father.
I want to thank the members of the organizing committee at the, I think it is, you can all hear me, right? Okay. I want to thank the members of the organizing committee of the Asian College of Journalism and welcome the students at the audience to whom these series of lectures have been addressed and meant for. And also welcome the members of the audience. And I thank you for giving me this opportunity to say a few words of the late T.G. Narayanan and why we have chosen to institute these series of lectures that bear his name. Mr. Narayanan was born on June the 9th, 1911 in the temple town of Kumbakonam. He had his education at the Madras Christian College when it was in Georgetown, and was followed by an honors degree that he got in English at the Madras Presidency College. He spent several years at the Hindu as a war correspondent, during which he covered the Imphal front and the war in Southeast Asia. He also worked substantially on famine that overtook Bengal and that devastated it, causing a loss of over 2 million lives. So he saw deprivation firsthand and reported on it, and then wrote a book on it called Famine Over Bengal that described its cause and its horrors on account of it. Toward the end of the war, TGN was stationed in New Delhi, and there he spent several months interviewing many of India's freedom fighters. He, in a later interview with the New York Times, he described those years as the best that he had in his career, that is, working as a journalist. After the war, he joined the United Nations as the chief of the Asiatic Division at the suggestion of Pandit Nehru. His work involved the war, even though he was chief of the Asiatic Division, his work involved the War Commission in Germany, and then went on to the freedom of Indonesia from the Dutch. And in his final years, he was the personal representative of the then Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, in the 18-nation treaty conference on the disarmament of nuclear weapons. Now, these series of lectures have had several people, economists, social scientists, human rights activists, deprivation journalists, scientists, and sociologists. This year, the committee has selected to have an environmental journalist and communicator as their speaker. And of course, excellent journalism is often associated with the many traits of excellent science, seeking the bare facts, critical thinking, and interpretation giving due respect to analysis, as well as clear communication. So we are truly appreciative of having a speaker who is an environmental journalist and communicator himself. Now, deprivation does not only involve food scarcity and food deprivation, it involves education deprivation, and of course, the deprivation of good water and air. And nowadays, we have to be concerned that it also involves the deprivation of fact and truth, with things that are being spread around. So we look forward to today's lecture, and because the late T.G. Narayanan spent many years as a journalist, and because of his abiding interest in deprivation and in critical thinking in journalism, we thought it is fitting that we have these series of lectures that are instituted in his name. So thank you very much.
So I have great pleasure in introducing S. Gopikrishna Warrier, who will be delivering the T.G. Narayan. This is the 12th T.G. Narayan Memorial Lecture, okay? And it is on climate change and the marginalized in India. So let me introduce to you Gopikrishna Warrier. Gopikrishna Warrier is an environmental journalist based in Thrissur in Kerala. He is presently the editorial director for Mongabe India, an environmental and conservation online publication. He has written for India Climate Dialogue, Nature India, Frontline Magazine, The News Minute, India Legal, The Times of India, The Hindu, and the Hindu Business Line newspaper. His pieces have also been published in the First Post and Forbes India. His stories and blogs can be read at A Touch of Green. That's the name of the blog. For a decade, from 1987 to 1992, he worked in New Delhi with 2 national-level environment and development NGOs, Action for Food Production and the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage. From 2003 to 2011, he worked with the communication departments of 2 international agricultural research organizations. One was the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, and the headquarters was in Hyderabad in India. He was a science writer and head of publications at the Africa Rice Center at Cotonou in Benin in West Africa. So there have been, as you can see, there have been many, many things that he has done and he's an expert on, and he's been writing about. And for the decade starting 1992, he was an environmental journalist in Chennai with Down to Earth magazine and the Hindu Business Line newspaper. Gopi is the former secretary of the Forum of Environmental Journalists in India, a professional body for environmental journalists in India. And in his earlier assignment as the regional environmental manager for PANOS, South Asia, he worked with the media in Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka to enhance journalists' understanding on climate change and biodiversity. So we're really looking forward to your lecture, Gopi. Thank you.
Respected guests, Dr. Ranganarayan, ACJ Chairperson, Mr. Shashikumar, trustees, Dean Nalini Rajan, faculty members, and dear students. I refer to the students at ACJ with much confidence. 2 months ago, we at Mongabe India, I think some of you would remember, we at Mongabe India partnered with ACJ to organize a training workshop on climate change journalism. The standout for me from that day in October was the enthusiasm of the students to participate in the group exercise and turn in multiple media products in record time. The world of journalism is in good hands. Round of applause to you. There is a second reason why I want to dedicate this lecture to the students at ACJ and young practicing journalists across the country. You're the generation that will bear the brunt of climate change as it continues to unravel in front of us. It is such a privilege and an honor to be invited to deliver the T.G. Narayanan Memorial Lecture. Talking about climate change and deprivation this afternoon in Chennai, do you remember the photograph that had gone viral during the Chennai floods of December 2015? It was one of the city's richest industrialist, Mr. A.C. Muthaiya, escaping the floods from his estate in Koturpuram in a fishing boat. This image went on to become the iconic image of the floods, and the invariable caption that was that the extreme weather events like floods affected everybody alike, the rich and the poor. The picture was real, but the conclusion was not true. Those days, I used to live in Chennai in an apartment off Arcot Road in Virugambakam. During the floods, my car was flooded, not fully though. Murugan, the young man who came to our apartment complex to clean our cars, was devastated in the floods. Living in a shanty on the banks of the Adayar River, he realized that the water was rising when his belongings started floating around him on that fateful night. I mean, those of you from Chennai would remember that fateful night when water was let out from Chambrambakam Reservoir into the Adayar River. Mr. Muttaya would have most likely returned after a few days to his home and continued to live on as if nothing had changed. I faced financial trauma for some time to get costly repairs done for my car. I know that for Murugan, life never returned to the same for many months after the event. I want to leave this picture with you before I start my lecture this afternoon. This lecture is to celebrate the memory of Mr. T.G. Narayanan, who was the Hindu's correspondent in the Second World War years. He reported extensively on the Bengal famine of 1943 and went on to write a book on it. Mr. T.G. Narayanan, or I would use the abbreviation if you permit, Mr. TGN, was born in 1911. I am a child of the 1960s. One of my challenges when I started preparing for this lecture was contextualizing TGN's work. My professional journalistic world started in the late 1980s and continues to the present. So it is difficult for me to even imagine the framework of a journalist who worked in the earlier decades of the 20th century. It got a step easier when my brother-in-law, who's in his early 80s, mentioned that he had met TGN in Geneva. My brother-in-law's father was a senior official at the International Labour Organization's headquarters in Geneva, and TGN was on his assignment with the UN Secretary General. Suddenly, in my mind's eye, I could imagine TGN as a person, a journalist, and a diplomat. There are some parallels between TGN's journalism and writings and the work we do today. In his book, Famine Over Bengal, published in 1944, TGN links the roots of the devastating famine to the Japanese Pearl Harbor attack and the occupation of Burma, thereby linking a regional issue to a global process. Today, to understand and deal with climate change, there is a constant need to appreciate the global and its relation to the regional and local issues in parallel. The second parallel is that, like with the 1943 famine, climate change also does not happen in isolation. TGN brought out the linkages of the famine to politics, society, and economic realities of the time. Likewise, as journalists covering climate change, we cannot look at climate change only as a meteorological or scientific process. We need to constantly work to unravel the linkages of climate change to political, social, and economic forces. Let us look at the third parallel. TGN begins chapter 11 of his book, which is on the situation in Calcutta. I quote, "Famine is a killer. It kills particularly the poor and weak. It kills children quickly. It kills them without giving them much of a chance. War is also a killer, but its victims don't come from a particular caste. It's a particular class. You may be a banker's son and your fellow a farmhand's son. Both of you stand an equal chance of being blown to bits by a bomb or shell. It is not like that in famine. The banker's son will escape and the farmhand's son will probably die. In a war, the farmhand's son has a chance of hitting back at the enemy. In a famine, he has not a dog's chance of even barking back at the unseen enemy. There is no escape for him from starvation and slow death." Unquote. The same holds true today. Even though climate change affects everybody, it is the poor and the marginalized who bear its brunt more. I will focus more on this later in this lecture. The fourth parallel between TGN's world and ours is not from something that he had written, but from a paper written on him and his journalism. In a 2020 paper titled Gandhi's Newspaper Man, published in the Modern South Asian Studies Journal, two academics from the University of Iowa, Subin Paul and David Dowling, commended TGN for finding gaps within the environment of censorship of the time and reporting incisively and critically. He could do his journalism operating behind two shields of perceived non-threats to the British. The first was writing for the English press, which the administrators considered to be less radical than the Indian language press. Two, he was writing for the Hindu, which was known to have a more measured approach in its criticism to the British. Now you'll ask me, how is this relevant today? Ask me. I edit Mongabay India, a digital publication that has earned its credibility for incisive reporting on the environment and climate change. In the last decade, we journalists are operating in a world where even a perceived criticism of the government could invite a visitation by one of the enforcement agencies. So having to make an impact with our stories without flagging unwanted attention is a skill that many of us have learned on the job. Ironically, frequent visitations of another kind have been shielding us environment journalists from trouble. With frequent and increasingly intense floods, droughts, and heat waves affecting almost every Indian, nobody can say that our work is not needed. This is even though, after the 1991 economic reforms, we environment journalists have been frequently labeled as anti-development, and in the more recent years, even occasionally as anti-national. This evening, we have gathered to remember Mr. Narayanan's writing and journalism on the deprived and contextualize it with the immediate and present challenge of how climate change adds to the deprivation of the already marginalized. So let us start our process by looking at a larger theater, just as how he would have done had he been living today. South Asia is a theater for climate change. It is an unparalleled theater for climate change across the world. A peninsula which was geologically a part of the African plate about 150 million years ago, broke apart, drifted through the ocean, and crashed against the Eurasian plate less than 100 million years ago. The highest ridge in the world, the Himalayas, rose as a result of this collision, thereby preventing any chance for the monsoonal winds to cross them and move northward beyond the mountains. Next only to the poles, the Himalayas hold the largest mass of ice in the form of glaciers. It is called the third pole. This glacial melt, along with spring water from below the snow line, is the source of water that supplies the main food growing belt in the South Asian countries. It is 1 out of 4 people in the world live in this South Asian region. 2 billion people live in the South Asian region out of the 8 billion population. It supplies the water from these rivers, supplies the Indo-Gangetic Plains, the Brahmaputra Valley in India, the Indus Plains in Pakistan, the Padma Delta in Bangladesh, and the mountain rivers in Bhutan and Nepal. Nature does not respect political boundaries. Natural units sometimes include more than one country and at times a part of a country. The South Asian subcontinent is one such unit, with the Himalayas forming one boundary and the Indian Ocean region, including the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, forming the other boundary. The South Asian monsoon is of critical importance when discussing climate change in the region. Every year, rain-bearing winds start from the Indian Ocean, pass through southern Arabian Sea, and pass on to land through the western coast, hitting my state Kerala the first, and they travel across the subcontinent till they collide with the Himalayas, turn west, and move all the way to Rajasthan and neighboring Pakistan. At the same time, though less known, most of us are less aware about this, moisture-laden winds travel from the Bay of Bengal over northeast India, take the same route, hit the Himalayas, turn west, and join the winds coming from the western Indian coast. Together, these two streams constitute the southwest monsoon, which provides the predominant rainfall supply for the South Asian countries. 3 months later, these same winds take the return route to the Indian Ocean. On the way, the winds pick up moisture from Bay of Bengal and cause rainfall on the eastern coast in the form of northeast monsoon, the kind of rain you get in Chennai. In this auditorium, 2 months ago, one of India's foremost climate experts, Dr. Madhavan Nair Rajivan, talked about the South Asian monsoonal system and how it is getting affected by climate change. He had a very interesting way of explaining the monsoonal system. He said that it was like a huge sea breeze. With the summer sun beating down on the Indian peninsula, the air over land becomes hot and rises, creating a low pressure belt. Moisture-laden winds from the seas around the Indian peninsula move inland to fill this space, bringing in rain clouds of the southwest monsoon. Later in the year, when the sea becomes warmer, the same winds return, picking up moisture from the sea and becoming the northeast monsoon. However, Rajivan himself admitted that this simple explanation is only for an initial understanding, and the monsoonal system is part of a complex and a dynamic global system. For instance, talking about the heavy and destructive rainfall in the western Himalayas earlier this year and in some of the recent years, Rajivan mentioned how the melting of Arctic ice is affecting the western disturbance, an airflow system that originates all the way in the Mediterranean region. Less ice in the poles due to global warming means more variability and unpredictability in the western disturbance. We constantly read about how El Nino and the La Nina, which are atmospheric systems over the Pacific Ocean, affect the South Asian monsoon. An El Nino year in the Pacific usually means hotter summers and droughts in the Indian subcontinent, and La Nina brings more than normal rains. But it is not just these Pacific systems that impact the monsoons, explains Professor Sulochana Gadgil in her 2008 paper. For those of you who haven't heard of Sulochana Gadgil, she's another eminent atmospheric scientist who died in 2025. She's Madhav Gadgil, who's very well known in ecological circles, his wife. The monsoons, according to Sulochana Gadgil, are dependent on the combination of at least 3 factors. First is the vaporization of water in the seas through the process of convection around the Indian subcontinent as the summer heat moves to these latitudes above the equator. When the sea surface temperature crosses 27.5 degrees centigrade, water vaporizes. These clouds then move according to the air pressure difference between the land and the sea. The second are the changes that are caused by El Nino and La Nina. During the El Nino process, convection is suppressed over the equatorial Indian Oceans, well as Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. On the other hand, during La Nina, convection is enhanced over these oceanic regions. 2025 was a La Nina year. 2024 was an El Nino year. And we will go into La Nina for a few years to come now. Thus, there are reduced rains and droughts in El Nino years and increased rains and floods during La Nina. Gadgil looked at a longer period of time and checked if this relationship was always true. She found that there were El Nino years when there were above average monsoons and La Nina years when there was drought. Obviously, there was a third element that needed to be considered. This is based on the anomaly of the east-west wind over the central equatorial Indian Ocean, the belt just below India. It is called the Equatorial Indian Ocean Oscillation, or EQINU. This causes strengthening of the convectional forces, resulting in increase in evaporation and vaporization and cloud formation in the western or eastern side of the equatorial Indian Ocean. There is increased rainfall over the Indian subcontinent when the convection is stronger over the western part of the equatorial Indian Ocean. So that means when convection is stronger near, closer to Kerala, there is more rainfall. Each of these factors are sensitive to the temperature profile over the ocean and the land. This in turn is changing rapidly due to the warming of the earth due to excessive emission of greenhouse gases. If the monsoon system is the sustenance for South Asia, then there are threats to it due to climate change. Recent research from the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology and multiple institutions across the world shows that the Indian Ocean is getting consistently warmer. Currently, the Indian Ocean has marine heat waves for 20 days in a year. The research finds that it could go up to 220 to 250 days per year by 2100. Just think about it. A tenfold increase in the number of heat waves days in the next 75 years. In geological time frame, I mean, even in monsoonal, in climate time frame, this is like a fraction of a second. Within the larger Indian Ocean marine ecosystem, it is the Arabian Sea which is picking up most of the heat. Another multi-institutional study from 2022 reported that the number of marine heatwave days in the northern part and the southeastern part of Arabian Sea has increased since the 1980s. With higher sea surface temperatures crossing the cyclogenesis point more often in recent years, there have been more frequent cyclones originating from the Arabian Sea. This means more frequent and intense storms and floods interspersed with drought for the Indian subcontinent. It also means that the seasonal regularity of the southwest monsoon, very, very important, seasonal regularity of the southwest monsoon can be disrupted with intense cyclonic rainfall. This has already been happening in the past few years. In 2019, the Director General of the India Meteorological Department was on record to Mongabe, India, that the days of intense rainfall of about 150 centimeters per day has been increasing in the past years. Every year, multiple cyclones, floods, heat waves and droughts are being reported from different parts of South Asia. There are days when on different pages of the same newspaper, at times even on the same page, there are reports of flooding and drought at the same time. There is another, but as yet still not discussed in detail, potential threat to the monsoonal system. The Earth Commission, which for those of you who are not aware of the Earth Commission, it's like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a global body of scientists which studies independently on atmospheric science. So Earth Commission, in its report published in 2023, included aerosol pollution or suspended particulate matter in air as an issue that could make changes at the planetary boundary level. Aerosols have a cooling effect since they can reflect back light and heat. This in turn can reduce the vaporization process and thereby the production of rain-bearing clouds. In a peer-reviewed paper published in Nature, the Earth Commission scientists stated that in the years in which there were volcanic eruptions that spewed tons of ash in the northern hemisphere, there were less rains north of the equator and heavy ones on the southern side. Using this information, the Commission extrapolated that since much of the human population lives in the northern hemisphere, resulting in a greater aerosol emissions, the monsoonal belts could gradually shift southwards. Now consider the adverse effects of a southward shift of the Indian monsoonal tract. Sulochana Gadgil died in July. I was researching to write an obituary. What fascinated me while reading her work was a paper in the Economic and Political Weekly in 2006, co-authored with her son Siddhartha Gadgil, in which they had looked at the correlation between annual rainfall, agriculture production, and the impact on the Indian GDP over 50 years of data. In drought years, as it could be expected, there was a decline in agriculture productivity and production, and this had a negative impact on the GDP. So in the years of excess rainfall, it could be easily assumed that there would be an increase in crop production and therefore a positive impact on the GDP. However, this was not the case. In excess rainfall years, floods damaged standing crops and again impacted the GDP adversely. This is where climate change is leading us to, where both droughts and floods will impact agriculture production and the GDP adversely. This year, 2025, could well be the kind of year that Sulochana and Siddharth Gadgil describe, A year of good monsoon, but also of floods, crop loss, and infrastructure damage. For the southwest monsoon from June to end September, there was a 7.9% increase from the 1971 to 2020 cumulative average. During the ongoing northeast monsoon, starting October 1, there's already been excess rainfall of 60%, excess rainfall in 60% of the districts in the country, and normal in 24%. That means 84% of the country got normal or excess rainfall. During this year's southwest monsoon season, heavy and incessant rains in the western Himalayan catchments led to high volume flows in Bias, Sutlej, Ravi and Ghaggar rivers. There was also controlled release of water from Bhakra, Pong and Ranjit Sagar dam reservoirs. This affected 16 villages in all of Punjab's 23 districts, causing much damage to paddy and other crops. Independent journalist Manu Maudgil covered the Punjab floods of this year for Mongo Bay India. Since the entire country looks at Punjab as the Green Revolution food basket, much of the media reporting was also about the rural hinterlands. However, the urban centers were in no less pain, with rivulets carrying sewage and industrial waste overflowing. One observation from Manu's reporting is particularly thought-provoking, and I want to share it here. Following calls on social media, farmers from across Punjab came in tractor trolleys with mud to strengthen embankments. Manu quotes Jugaraj Singh, a farmer in Guram village near Harike wetland where Sutlej and Bias merge, as saying, "We don't know these people or where they came from. They just arrived with soil to strengthen the bund in our village, which was about to give way." Remember, this is the land of langars and community kitchens. And we had very similar, many examples from Chennai during the 2015 floods of people helping each other using social media. Marathwada, that region of Maharashtra that is known for its devastating and persistent drought, was flooded this year, with the southwest monsoon recording 128% of the long-term average. A region that normally thirsts for water was inundated with heavy rainfall that came in short bursts of time, destroying standing crops and infrastructure. Like in the case of Punjab, there were large cattle deaths, adding to the misery of the farming community. A case that made news from Marathwada was of a farm family losing 17 Jersey cows overnight when the water flooded their cowshed. We may take this lightly, but then, for a farmer, this is devastating. Perhaps he may never recover from this in his life. If economic gains from the manufacturing and the services sector are not able to compensate for the agricultural losses of 2025 rains, there would be a scar on the annual GDP figures. Macroeconomic figures aside, agriculture in India packs a harsh reality, and that's something that we should remember. Though agriculture supports only 16% of the national GDP, it supports 46% of the livelihoods in the country. 46% of our population is dependent on agriculture-related sector. The share of agriculture's contribution to the GDP has been steadily decreasing in the past decades. It was 47.6% in 1960, 35.7% in 1980, and 22.3% in 2000. This is not because agriculture has declined in decades, but it is synced with the economic growth trajectory of a nation that has moved from a developing country to an emerging economy, where the share of contribution from the manufacturing and service sector steadily increases at the cost of the agriculture sector. However, with 46% of India's population still dependent on agriculture sector for their livelihoods, there is a human cost far greater than the GDP cost every time an extreme weather event destroys crops or kills livestock. In recent years, heat has been as much a cause of distress for the farming and pastoral communities as floods. In 2022, the North Indian heat wave took a heavy toll on wheat production. It also affected livestock productivity, causing immense stress to cows and therefore reducing milk production. In 2025, just months before floods affected parts of the country, much of northern India was under a heat wave stress. A joint study by Climate Central and World Weather Attribution notes that India is among the countries affected by worsening heat since 2015. Such events, the report notes, have become 0.3 degrees centigrade, which is quite a lot, 0.3 degree centigrade hotter and twice as likely. I'm sure that if TGN was alive and professionally active in the present decade, he would have written extensively about the COVID pandemic and the lived hardships it caused most of the country's population. The forced reverse migration that millions had to undertake between 2020 and 2021 would not have gone unnoticed and unreported by him. The Great Indian Reverse Migration of 2020-21 was in scale comparable to the post-partition migration of 1947-48. However, unlike the movement of millions of people that happened after India was divided into two countries, the COVID lockdown reverse migration is an event that the national government wants us to forget. It is difficult to find figures on how many millions reverse migrated during the COVID pandemic, when even figures on how many millions of Indians migrate within the country is vague. The last time we had a national census was 2011. According to a report by the Indian Association of Study of Population, the 2011 census reports nearly 448 million migrants. When compared to the total population computed that year, this meant that nearly 37% of the country's population had moved from one place to another. It is even more difficult to find how many of these migrants returned under distress during the COVID pandemic. A 2022 study using proxy sources, it's a study in which Dr. Iruday Rajan, a very famous expert on migration, has also contributed. It says that 70 million people migrated during the COVID pandemic, returned home during the COVID pandemic. Now compare this with approximately 18 million migrants recorded during the partition of India during 1947-48. Locked off from being able to earn a living, if there was anything that protected the millions from starvation during 2020-2021, was the good Kharif harvests in both these years. The Sundarbans and the Even without going into the politics of memory, the 2021 event showed a mirror to the nation on how many millions had moved from their homes and hearths to earn a livelihood. It would be sobering for us to remember that not all moved across the country to earn a better income, but a significant portion were forced out due to climate change induced complications to their already harassed lives. My colleagues Sahana Ghosh and Karthik Chandramoli had traveled to the Sundarbans in 2018 and looked at the impacts of sea level rise, increased vulnerability to cyclones and high tidal waves, salinization, changing landmass had on communities of the mangrove-rich delta. With their incomes drastically reducing, almost every family has people migrating to Kolkata or other parts of the country. Sundarbans is also a tiger country. And when the island space reduces, tigers and humans have greater space overlap and conflicts. Sahana and Karthik met many tiger widows who lived through constant post-traumatic stress disorder. The story of climate-induced trauma is not just from the Sundarbans, but also from coastal Tamil Nadu, where fish workers who were stranded mid-sea during Cyclone Oki are finding it difficult and traumatic to return to fishing. It is also from the Tadoba Tiger Reserve in Maharashtra, where climate-induced resource loss is bringing tigers into habitations, leading to more conflicts, injuries, and death. There is also the trauma of farm families in Marathwada and Vidarbha regions of Maharashtra, when the man of the household ends his life unable to clear his debt after an unending cycle of extreme weather events. In fact, in recent years, understanding and providing support to deal with climate-related anxiety and mental health issues has become a paramedical science. However, as with other support systems, those in the margins are less likely to get support than those who can afford to pay for it. The Sundarbans and the Marathwada region have been identified as 2 among 5 climate-induced migration hotspots, identified by the Climate Action Network South Asia. The other 3 are Almora and Uttarakhand, facing erratic rainfall and rising temperatures, Saharsa and Bihar due to recurring floods and rising temperatures, and Kendrapara and Odisha due to cyclones, floods, droughts, and heat waves. In a study published in 2024, two researchers followed a group of Dalit migrants from Marathwada who had come to the textile township of Tirupur to escape drought in their villages. However, they did not come to find labor in the hosiery industry, for which Tirupur is famous, but to find labor with the urban sanitation company dealing with municipal solid waste. The marginalized in one location are likely to be double marginalized in another location. One of the learnings that I've had while covering environment over the years is the understanding that most of the times climate change impacts sit on top of every other factor that causes disparity and distress for those who are already marginalized. Most of us Indians are just one disaster or one event away from bankruptcy. How much we can endure is a function of not just our earnings and savings, but also the relative positions that we have in the society. When the water in the common village well decreases during a drought year, it is not as if the remaining water is rationed with the same equity that existed during the years of plenty. The rich and powerful corner far more than the poor and the marginalized. Not a direct, but in a relatable analogy, relatable in Chennai, Karnataka has no qualms in sharing or flushing, if you may, Kaveri water to Tamil Nadu in an excess rainfall year. The indications of the weaker sections of the population getting disproportionately hit have already started coming, and these are only going to increase in the years and decades to come. This is partially because in the past decades, the rich have become richer and the poor have become poorer. This disparity was further enhanced during the COVID pandemic. This, when combined with less access to dwindling common property resources, make the poor more vulnerable to the impacts of changing climate. This marginalization is true both in rural and urban environments. Since the time we started publishing Mongabay India in January 2018, we have reported about the impacts of the decline of commons from multiple environments. For instance, for tribal communities of Koraput district in Odisha, the degradation of forest commons have led to a reduced availability of forest resources. The ambiguity of land ownership and tenure of tribal commons leads to a greater degradation. In the Silicon Valley city of, as an environmentalist, Silent Valley comes before Silicon Valley. In the Silicon Valley city of Bengaluru, citizen groups concerned about the decline of urban lakes are trying to steward their recovery. Coastal commons, such as sandbanks, mangroves, mudflats, seagrass beds, open beaches, and salt marshes, have not only provided economic income to coastal communities, but also covered them with climate resilience. Sacred groves or freestanding forest patches that communities have protected over generations due to a religious or spiritual association have traditionally provided climate resilience in the form of water sources, food resources, and medicinal plants. Multiple reasons are threatening these groves today. The summer of 2017 was drier than normal in South India, with the previous year being a drought year. 2016 was a drought year in southern India. That summer, I traveled extensively through many sacred groves trying to understand and report on how they were providing climate resilience in a stress year. The sacred groves were providing the ecosystem services, but I realized that most of them were under some form of threat or the other. In northern Kerala, the sacred groves were vulnerable to destruction because the lands on which they stood did not have legal protection. In Kodagu or Coorg, even though the land had better protection, there were strong forces of habitat change that were threatening these stands. In the Nilgiris, from where two major tributaries of the Kaveri originate, there was a feeble flow in some of the streams originating from well-preserved Shola forests. However, the rapid urbanization in the Nilgiris was putting all its native habitats under severe stress. In the mountain block of Kolli Hills in Namakkal district of Tamil Nadu, there were 250 sacred groves within 440 square kilometer area. These groves that have been identified as ecological relics by experts have had lesser destruction since Kolli Hills has less tourism and other influx than the Nilgiris. But then all of you know that getting more tourists to Koli Hills is just a few Instagram posts away. In terms of management, sacred groves are more akin to community forests rather than reserve forests. Restrictions in sacred forests are enforced most through belief and tradition, rather than by forest laws implemented by forest officers. In the Toda hamlet of Artwal Mand, in the edge of Nilgiris Plateau, overlooking the drop into Sigur Ghat, Toda elder Poofst told me that the Shola forest in her village provide her family almost all the medicines they need. Medicinal plants, water availability, climate control, protection during extreme weather events, the ecosystem services that these forest patches provide are many. And when they disappear, they expose the nearby communities to as many climate vulnerabilities. So is the case with wetlands. These ubiquitous water-holding depressions around us, which we have turned into garbage dumps in the past few decades, combined with green patches that are key to climate resilience in urban spaces. The Care Earth Trust in Chennai did a systematic exercise for the water bodies and green patches within the metropolitan area and how they have been replaced with urban construction over the past decades. Similar work has also been done for Bengaluru, showing how it is no longer worthy of being called the city of lakes. When the devastating floods of December 2015 happened in Chennai, everybody talked about the missing blues and greens in the city. The conversation continued for perhaps a year and disappeared. Big events like the 2015 Chennai floods or the frequent flooding that Bengaluru faces affects almost all sections of the society. However, even when the water or heat recedes, the pernicious impact of an extreme weather systems remain on those who do not have the luxury of sitting indoors. After the COVID pandemic, a new class of workers have emerged in almost all urban centers in the country. We call them gig workers, thereby signifying that they are not associated permanently with an institution and therefore not eligible for any protection that permanent employment can bring. They make life convenient for the urban consumer, come rain or shine. In fact, some aggregators pride in claiming that the workers can reach groceries to the customers within 15 minutes. That is lesser than the time that an ambulance will take to reach you if you have a heart attack. Just think about it. However, the health of these gig workers has been suffering due to extreme weather. A 2023 study that assessed the health of motorcycle-borne delivery workers in Ghaziabad near Delhi noted that they're exposed to higher concentration of particulate matter, benzene, which can be carcinogenic, and even ground-level ozone, compared to the population that does not need to spend long hours on the road. They also have a high exposure to heat stress during the heat wave days of summer. Unlike those who work from the comfort of offices or homes, the gig workers spend almost all of their days on the road, either waiting to pick up their orders or in traffic congestion. There is anything that can provide them succor is the availability of urban commons, such as parks or tree-lined avenues, where they could rest between order runs or during the peak heat of the afternoons. Many city administrations even deny them this support. During the heat of the summer of 2024, independent journalist Pragati Ravi reported for Mongabay, India, on how the famous Kaban Park in Bengaluru was kept closed during the afternoon hours, the time when these itinerant workers needed it the most. With heat waves becoming more frequent and severe, heat has become a pernicious stress affecting the marginalized in India's urban centers. Floods are obvious, usually force immediate political action, and thus elicit a response from administrators. Heat, on the other hand, is there in the background, and it is not always possible to link illnesses and death to the swelter in the slumped elements, and do not usually call for immediate action from the administrators. Losing the blue and green areas or the urban commons such as wetlands and forest patches only makes this worse. With buildings trapping hot air between them, urban heat islands have become the new challenge. Even within cities, different parts have different real feel of the same temperature. For instance, the same temperature profile has different impacts in Govindpuri and Greater Kailash, two neighborhoods of South Delhi, not very far apart in terms of distance. This is not merely a function of how closely houses are stacked in Govindpuri, but also on the fact that air conditioners are everywhere in GK2. The administrative response to heat stress is patchy at the best. The Tamil Nadu government recently released a study report on changing heat profile of all its revenue blocks. But at the national level, a clear picture understanding of the problem is as yet missing. While some cities, such as Ahmedabad, have a heat action plan, a comprehensive national response plan is still not available. When it floods, the affluent Mr. A.C. Muttaya in his estate in Koturpuram, me in my apartment in Virugambakam, or Murugan, who used to come to clean my car, are all affected. However, heat would affect each one of us differently. My colleague Simran Sarur followed an ATM security guard in Delhi who had suffered a heat stroke in the summer of 2024. Simran met the 54-year-old Devi Prasad Ahirwar who collapsed while on duty one day. Fortunately for him, there are so many thousands who are not as fortunate as him. People around him responded fast, poured water over him and moved him to a hospital. He was admitted with very high fever in a life-threatening situation. Though Devi Prasad survived the heat stroke, the medical expenses broke his family down. His employers stopped picking his calls when he needed their support the most. A year later, Simran travelled to Devi Prasad's village in Tikamgarh district of Madhya Pradesh to meet him. Devi Prasad could not work in Delhi any longer. Nobody was willing to employ him. He could not, and the heat stroke had left an indelible impact on his brain. He could no longer speak clearly and felt dizzy every time he stood. Mortality from heat stroke can be as high as 64%. 64%, meaning 2 in 3 heat stroke victims can die. There are statistics which most of us perhaps have not heard or can't realize the seriousness of it. This is what Simran discovered while working on these stories. She also discovered a study that links the marginalized castes are more prone to heat stroke because their lack of access to resources forces them into jobs that require being out in the open. I guess for a journalist who covered the Bengal famine of 1943 with compassion and empathy, Mr. T.G. Narayanan would have wanted journalists many generations younger than him to look at the impact of climate change on people like Devi Prasad Ahirwar. Good journalism can create reverberations in the public mind, which hopefully, in turn, can result in improved and inclusive policies. That is the motivation that keeps all of us in this room going. I've been writing and talking about the environment and climate change for close to 4 decades now. There have been 3 major changes since the time I started till now. One, even in the 1990s, climate change was considered as a futuristic speculation. Today, after repetitious and frequent floods, droughts, and heat waves, climate change is for real for the public. That makes life one step easier for us journalists. 2, the challenge still is how to tell the stories in a way that makes an impact, avoiding fatigue. This challenge is further complicated with newer forms of storytelling emerging regularly, especially since stories on any of the traditional platforms, that is print, electronic or digital, requires to be strengthened through social media. In Mongabay, India, we are fortunate that my younger colleagues, I am the only dinosaur in the group, my younger colleagues are far smarter than I am in this department. The third change is very significant. I presume in TGN's time, it would have been acceptable to report a story in as straightforward a manner as possible. Today, merely telling that the climate is changing is not adequate. Journalists like us have to constantly look at nuances and linkages that make the larger messaging on climate change layered and interesting. For instance, the fact that India is urbanizing fast and much of the climate action needed has to come from there led us at Mongo Bay India to realize that though the Panchayati Raj acts in various states had effectively brought devolution of power to rural local bodies, their urban counterparts were constantly at loggerheads with bureaucrat-led parastatal bodies, such as Metro Water or water supply boards, transport corporations, etc. Decisions that elected local body representative, decisions that the mayor or a corporator needs to make, decisions that the elected local body representative needed to take were being taken by IAS officers reporting to the state government. And there's a serious sort of breakdown of devolution of power in urban areas. My colleague Kundan Pandey dug deeper and found other deep-seated structural issues. Forget climate action plans, many urban centers either do not have master plans or have not updated them to keep pace with the present-day realities. Even in towns and cities that have climate action plans, they're not legally binding. Urban governance bodies have inadequate financial resources because the property tax is either low or is not paid by money. We also search for linkages that could make our climate change narrative richer. Shailesh Srivastava, one of our senior editors, gathered information from across the country and reported on how extreme weather events are causing a steady decline in the number of days that schools can work across the year. One of his findings was very interesting. In Assam, River Brahmaputra has islands within it, and there are habitations and schools on them. With the river flooding annually since time immemorial, the schools have designed, the school timetable, annual timetable has been designed with many dot days to account for the flooding. But what is confounding the school authorities now in the recent years are the out-of-syllabus heat waves that are causing holidays. There's one of our series of stories that always fills me with hope for climate resilience that is evolved from the grassroots, with minimal support or inducement from either the government or NGOs. Anchored by my colleagues Aditi Tandon and Kartik Chandramouli, this series tells the story of ordinary people who work to conserve the wetlands in the neighborhood. Here are a few examples. A young man enthuses others and cleans wetlands in Himachal Pradesh. A group of Buddhist monks conserve lakes above 4,000 meter altitude in Arunachal Pradesh. 4,000 meters is much above the altitude we can imagine in South India. I mean, our highest ridges are 2,600 meters, So one man's initiative led to the rejuvenation of mangroves that protects his coastal Odisha village from erosion, and a shepherd who digs and rejuvenates ponds in Mandya region in Karnataka. We journalists will need to keep the public discussion on the impact of climate change on the marginalized and stories of resilience from the ground alive. Sir Partha Dasgupta, internationally famous environmental economist, articulated the linkage between the global economic order and climate change to Mongo Bay, India in a 2023 interview. He said that the global order continues with the same model of economic growth that was designed after the Second World War. The belief is that when something is causing a problem with this model, then a component can be replaced to continue with the same trajectory. For instance, if fossil fuels are causing climate change, then they need to be replaced with renewable energy, and the growth process can be continued with. We are seeing the problem with this thought process. This dominant model does not care about the marginalized. It is for us to consistently and continuously bring them back into the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gopi, for this nice presentation. I just probably want to pick your brains on, is climate change like a holy cow? In the sense that for everything that is needed to be addressed to some other angle, we keep on looking at climate change as the way to kind of characterize it. So governments, NGOs, maybe even the media sometimes takes things that need to be addressed through other means as climate change induced. Maybe there is problem somewhere else. How do you think about it?
Yeah, thank you, Kavi. I mean, this was the earliest sort of understanding we journalists who were following climate change had when we started thinking seriously about climate change or writing seriously about climate change. Climate change literally sits on top of everything else. Everything is not caused by climate change, and we have to constantly have this dialogue. I mean, I keep getting pitches for stories which journalists would say everything is caused by climate change. So we constantly have to sort of keep this dialogue going that everything is not caused by climate change. I mean, a whole lot of things are caused by other factors, which are regular factors, natural factors, which are happening. And climate change just sits on top of it, maybe adds to it. Of course, climate change is a key word today. I mean, that is given. We all realize that. But that's still, I mean, but to be true to the communication, we have to be clear that what is climate change and what is not climate change. A very specific example. Every year you will hear stories from Kerala about sea level rising, and you realize that's not essentially sea level rise. These are the regular annual process of coastal accretion and coastal erosion. But what climate change does is, on top of that, it adds to tidal amplitudes. And if mangroves have been destroyed, it adds to effective sea level rise. But it's not climate change that is causing that problem. Problem is caused by physical disturbance of the coastline and the coastal cell dynamics. So I think we just have to be very clear and talk about this every time we have an issue like this. Everything is not climate change.
Thanks, Gopi. Excellent presentation. I did not know that you can question journalists. It's always the other way around. So
Pardon?
I did not know that you can question journalists. It's always journalist asking questions. So I was a bit hesitant to ask question. It's a bit simple. Two things, if you can shed light on. The last point that you mentioned about the Partha Dasgupta's interview, that social process or the developmental process has not changed.
Yeah.
And we are just kind of updating technologies. But like when you are talking to people and the politician, are they also accepted the same thing? Like our mindset is like that. We don't want to change the system. This is our future. We accepted that one. And second thing, how do you see the role of the scientist in it? You must have talked to them also in this course of the journey.
Yeah. It doesn't. I mean, see. The point is, you asked about if you talk to politicians, would they accept the fact about? I mean, that's where we have to talk more about. There is a very. I mean, Kavi is sitting just behind you. There is a very strong, discipline of environmental economics, where economics, study discipline which looks at economics of conservation. And that discipline is 30, 40 years old. But the point is, what is easier for the policymaker to understand? I mean, like if a dam was being built, what is easier for a policymaker to understand? That the dam being built would give so many megawatts of power, it will lead to industrialization, lead to urbanization. That's easier to understand. But the point is, there are scientists who work on the conservation of, on the economic value of the forest that's going to be submerged, and that economic value is in perpetuity. It's not for 40 years that a dam's life cycle gives, But how do you communicate that? How do you bring that into the mainstream? So one of the areas we've been trying to do is look at more environmental economic stories, etc., bring them into the mainstream. And role of scientists, I mean, what is there for me to say? I mean, role of scientists is, that's the base of all this. I mean, I only wish, I mean, just as how much we try as journalists, we try to reach out to scientists, I only wish at times they also make that much of effort to communicate to the public or reach out to us.